There are people who carry a certain kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. You wake up after 8 hours, maybe more, and the first sensation isn't restfulness, it's weight. Not a heaviness in your body, but somewhere deeper, in the quiet spaces of the soul. It's as if you are carrying invisible luggage, and you can't remember when you picked it up, nor do you know how to put it down. They are the silent observers in the crowd. On the surface, they look functional, working, smiling, fulfilling obligations. When people ask what's wrong, they often can't point to anything specific, because it wasn't one big catastrophe that broke them. It was 1,000 little things, 1,000,000 tiny fractures, that quietly drained them over time. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts to the soul. Others look at this state and misunderstand it completely. They might see laziness, apathy, or perhaps a lack of ambition. They assume that because the person is moving, they must be fine. But they don't know that behind that functional exterior is an incredibly complex inner world experiencing profound emotional depletion. See, people who are tired of existing don't necessarily want to disappear. They just desperately want the noise to stop. The noise of relentless expectations, the noise of constant comparison, the noise of pretending to be okay when every single day feels like a performance you didn't audition for, yet you are forced to play the lead role. What is truly happening inside the mind of someone who is simply tired of the act of existing? The first manifestation of this deep exhaustion is a profound muting of emotions. Psychologists call this state emotional exhaustion. It's a point where the mind stops fighting, not out of weakness, but out of sheer depletion. It happens when your emotional output has exceeded your emotional input for too long. It's not intense sadness, it's a pervasive numbness. There is a specific term for this inability to feel pleasure: anhedonia. Imagine living your life in grayscale. Joy feels like a distant language you once knew how to speak, but have now forgotten the words for. Things that once brought delight, music, connection, achievements start to feel neutral. Everything turns flat. This numbness leads to the second manifestation: profound withdrawal. When the inner world is depleted, the outer world becomes overwhelming. People in this state often start pulling away, not because they want to, but because social energy becomes an expense they can no longer afford. Even small talk feels like lifting a mountain. They might cancel plans or spend more time alone. This isn't rejection of others. It's self-preservation. Their nervous system cannot handle one more emotional demand. When the world becomes too loud, isolation feels like a form of safety. The third manifestation is meaning fatigue. This goes beyond typical burnout. It's an existential crisis disguised as exhaustion. When people lose touch with what gives their life purpose, the mechanics of daily living start to feel unbearably heavy. It's not that they hate their existence. It's that they can't find a compelling reason to keep repeating it. Wake up, work, scroll, sleep, repeat. Days blur together, and slowly they start asking the terrifying question: what's the point? To understand the roots of this exhaustion, we must look at who these people often are. Paradoxically, people who are tired of existing are rarely the ones who have given up easily. In fact, they are often the ones who've tried too hard to keep everything together. They are the peacemakers, the helpers, the ones who always show up, even when they have nothing left to give. They've learned how to survive in chaos, but never how to rest in peace. This often stems from early life experiences where they learned their value was tied to their function, their ability to help, or their capacity to remain strong amidst instability. They learned how to survive by suppressing their own needs. This becomes a defense mechanism, a survival strategy. Being hypercompetent, always available, constantly moving, these behaviors kept them safe or earned them approval. This exhaustion is not just emotional, it's profoundly biological. The brain, under prolonged stress, begins to rewire itself, not for happiness, but for survival. It starts filtering experiences through the lens of fatigue. The reward systems slow down. Dopamine responses, the neurochemical basis for motivation, weaken. Motivation, that spark that makes life feel meaningful, fades. This is why telling someone in this state to just be positive is ineffective. Their neurological capacity for motivation has been compromised. So when someone says, "I'm just tired," it's not laziness. It's the mind saying, "I've been carrying too much for too long." This kind of fatigue is cumulative. It builds up from years of emotional suppression. Every "I'm fine" you said when you weren't. Every time you smiled instead of cried. every time you stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Each of those moments adds up until one day you can't fake energy anymore. That's when you start noticing small signs. Time feels slower. You look around and wonder when life stopped feeling like life. We also must consider the societal context. We live in a world that rewards productivity, not peace. You're praised for working overtime, but never for taking a quiet day to think. You're celebrated for pushing through, but rarely for slowing down. So, what happens? People learn to equate worth with movement. And when they finally stop, they feel guilty, as if rest is a form of failure. This guilt is part of what keeps people trapped in quiet exhaustion. The mind starts whispering, "You don't deserve rest until you've earned it." But that's the paradox. If you wait until you've earned rest, you'll never get it. Because in modern life, there's always more to do, more to prove, more to fix. And so, you keep running, even when you've forgotten why you started. One of the most painful truths is this: being tired of existing doesn't mean you're weak. It often means you've been strong for too long. You've carried emotions you never processed, responsibilities you never asked for, and expectations that no one could possibly meet. And after years of pretending that weight doesn't matter, your spirit begins to whisper, "I can't keep doing this." The strategy that once saved you being hypercompetent, always available, suppressing your needs is now the very thing that is draining the life out of you. The cost of this defense mechanism is profound. It makes you feel lonely, exhausted, and fundamentally disconnected from yourself. You become a stranger to your own desires. You know what the world expects from you, but you've forgotten what you truly want for yourself. This leads to the crisis of meaning fatigue. You can have comfort, stability, even success, but if your life is not aligned with your core values, it will eventually feel hollow. Safety without meaning eventually feels like a cage. Humans aren't meant to simply survive routines. We're meant to feel alive in them. When that connection is lost, the question, "What's the point?" becomes deafening. But the question itself isn't hopeless. It's a sign of awakening. Because when the soul asks, "What's the point?" it's really saying, "I need a reason to stay." This moment, as bleak as it feels, is often where transformation begins. Because tiredness, in its deepest form, is a signal, a message from the subconscious saying something in your life is no longer aligned with who you are. And that realization, while painful, can also be freeing. It means there's something to be reclaimed: purpose, authenticity, or even simple peace. The path of healing and acceptance begins with radical honesty. You see, the moment you admit that you're tired of existing, something shifts. For the first time, you're being honest. Not with others, but with yourself. And that honesty, though it feels heavy, is actually the beginning of healing. Because until you name your fatigue, you'll keep trying to fix it with distractions, new goals, new screens, anything that feels like movement. But what you're really craving isn't more movement, it's meaning. One of the most profound discoveries in psychology is that meaning is medicine. Viktor Frankl wrote that humans can endure almost anyhow if they have a why. People who rediscover their why often find their energy returning, not instantly, but gradually. The tiredness begins to shift from despair to direction. It's the difference between "I'm exhausted because nothing matters" and "I'm exhausted because I'm growing." Meaning doesn't always come from grand achievements. Sometimes it's found in the smallest, quietest moments. Watching the rain hit the window, hearing a song that understands you, sitting in silence without needing to perform for anyone. It's in those moments that your nervous system finally says, "Thank you." Because rest is not laziness, it's repair. When you start to rest, not just physically, but emotionally, you begin to notice how much of your life has been driven by survival. Every decision has been about avoiding pain rather than creating peace. This realization is the first step toward authenticity. You begin to ask deeper questions. What would my life look like if I stopped chasing approval? What if peace mattered more than productivity? And suddenly, the exhaustion starts to make sense. It wasn't weakness, it was resistance. Your mind fighting against a version of life that no longer aligns with your truth. So maybe the goal isn't to erase the tiredness. Maybe it's to listen to it, to treat it as a messenger instead of a curse. Because somewhere inside that exhaustion is a voice whispering, "You've outgrown something." Maybe it's a job that drains you, a lifestyle that no longer fits, a version of yourself that survived, but no longer thrives. Here's something most people overlook. Energy doesn't just come from sleep or nutrition. It comes from alignment. When your actions reflect your values, you feel light. When they don't, even small tasks feel impossible. The body follows the soul. So, what can someone do when they feel this tired? The answer isn't to overhaul your life overnight. It's to begin small acts of honesty. Start noticing what drains you. Start noticing what nourishes you. Once you see those patterns, you can begin to release them. Gently. Because healing isn't a performance. It's a quiet returning. Somewhere along the way, you start realizing that the world isn't asking you to be perfect. It's you who's been demanding that. You've built impossible standards out of fear that if you rest, you'll fall behind. But behind what? Behind who? The moment you stop comparing your timeline to others, you begin to see that peace was never behind achievement. It was always behind acceptance. There's something powerful that happens when a person accepts their exhaustion without shame. It transforms the way they treat themselves. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" they ask, "What is my mind trying to tell me?" And slowly that question becomes the bridge back to life. You start rediscovering wonder, not the loud cinematic kind, but the subtle kind. The quiet beauty of small things. These tiny anchors remind you that life doesn't have to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It just has to be felt. And feeling, ironically, is something we unlearn as we grow older. We're taught to analyze and optimize, but we're rarely taught to simply feel. People who are tired of existing are often the ones who've lost touch with that raw emotional connection to life. They've become numb, not because they don't care, but because caring has hurt too much. The way back isn't through more control, it's through surrender, through allowing yourself to be human again, to cry without justification, to rest without guilt, because sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't to keep pushing forward. It's to stop, breathe, and start again from a place of truth. There's a strange beauty in that, because people who've known the weight of emotional exhaustion often become the most compassionate souls you'll ever meet. They understand pain without words. They value honesty above everything because they've learned that pretending doesn't heal. And maybe that's the paradox of being tired of existing. It humbles you. It strips away illusions and forces you to look at what's real. You start to realize that life isn't about constant achievement. It's about alignment, about finding the quiet spaces where you can breathe without pretending. If you're listening to this and something in you resonates, that invisible fatigue, that quiet ache, remember this: you are not alone. You are not strange for feeling this way. You're simply human in a world that often forgets how to rest. Your tiredness is not a flaw, it's a compass. It's pointing you back towards something real. Maybe being tired of existing doesn't mean you failed at life. Maybe it means you finally paused long enough to realize that life deserves to be lived consciously, not just endured. And that pause, that breath, that gentle awareness might just be the beginning of everything you've been searching for. Remember, you deserve peace, and you are not alone on this journey.